Hello, welcome back to our ladies Bible class. This is on the book of Hebrews, and this should be number 8 in our series. We'll be covering Hebrews chapter 7 today. I'm sorry for the delay in the lesson. I was out of town, and then I had technical issues with my computer, but we are back at it, and I'm excited to present this lesson to you today. So our little tagline for this one, and remember these came from Rob Whitaker. I have changed this one for chapter 7 because it's been a while since I've listened to his full lesson on this, and I wasn't sure how his phrase connected with what was in the chapter, so I changed it a little bit for my purposes. And so this one, I have priest of God in heaven. Okay, chapter 7, priest of God in heaven. This is the chapter where the author of Hebrews finally gets around to discussing why Jesus is called a priest after the order of Melchizedek. The priesthood of Jesus is an important discussion, and this chapter will tell us why. Jesus and Melchizedek are compared in chapter 7. We originally meet this mysterious priest in Genesis chapter 14. To give a little background on this, Abram had just defeated, I believe it was 5 kings that had taken Lot captive. He'd freed all the prisoners of war, and he'd taken spoils. Then the king of Sodom and the king of Salem came out to meet him. Here's what it says there. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he gave him a tithe of all. Now the king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the persons and take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to the Lord God Most High, that the possessor of heaven and earth, that I take nothing from a thread to a sandal strap, and that I will not take anything that is yours, lest you say I have made Abram rich, except only what the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men who you sent me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portions. This is verses 18 through 24. Of Genesis 14. So now back in Hebrews, the first 3 verses of chapter 7, the writer sums up this story that we find in Genesis. We learned several things about Melchizedek. Here's what we learned. Number 1, he was a king of Salem. Number 2, he was a priest of the God Most High, or Most High God, rather. Most High God. Number 3, he met Abraham after the slaughter of the kings. Number 4, he blessed Abraham. Number 5, Abraham gave him a tenth of all. Number 6, first being translated King of Righteousness. Number 7, also King of Salem, meaning King of Peace. Number 8, without father, without mother, or genealogy. Number 9, no beginning or end of his life is recorded. Number 10, made like the Son of God. Number 11, remains a priest continually. Now, the last 2 in this list are rather puzzling. Scholars say that there's one of 2 explanations that I could find anyway. Explanation number 1, this guy just appeared out of nowhere. We have no record of him. He was human, but since we don't know his history or his genealogy, he has no recorded death date. So in our minds, he's still alive. Or explanation number 2 is he was Jesus, as we call it, the pre-incarnate Jesus, who briefly came to earth for this event. I don't know which is more accurate, and neither of them make sense to me. Those last 2 points are definitely a mystery, but regardless of the exactness of this section, we don't necessarily have to understand it, but the writer's point is clear, and we can see that in the rest of this chapter. Verse 5 begins by comparing Melchizedek with the priests of the Old Testament. Number 1, they both received the priesthood. Number 2, they both received tithes, one from their brethren, the Old Testament, the Levitical priests, but one received tithes from Abraham. In addition, Melchizedek blessed Abraham. Note the mention of the lesser being blessed by the greater. Number 3, here on earth in the Old Testament, the priests are mortal men. Does this imply that Melchizedek wasn't mortal? Number 4, but even Levi, because of his grandfather's tithe, his great-grandfather's tithes, his great-grandfather being Abram, the tithe that he gave to Melchizedek. So it says because of that, he gave tithes to Melchizedek because his great-grandfather did. The writer continues by saying, if the Levitical priesthood were perfect, why would there be any need to change? There wouldn't be. We are finally coming around to the point the writer is making. Since there was a change in the priesthood, there must be a change in the law. Then begins somewhat of a legal discussion. The Levitical priesthood law demanded that the priest be a descendant of Levi. Jesus wasn't a Levite. He was from the tribe of Judah. By Jesus becoming a priest, he would have violated or broken the law of Moses, the Levitical law. But we know Jesus didn't break any laws. That would be called a sin, and Jesus was sinless. So how is he a priest without breaking the law? Verse 12 tells us, the priesthood changed, and so did the law. Verses 18 through 19 tell us that the old law had weakness and unprofitableness. It made nothing perfect. So now there is the bringing of a better hope. Through this law, we draw near to God. Then the writer states that Jesus was made a priest by an oath. This was an important point. Recall in other chapters where it said priests had to be called or ordained, appointed. This writer again quotes the same Old Testament passage found in Psalm 110, verse 4. Psalm 110, verse 4. The Lord has sworn and will not relent. You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. So God made Jesus priest. He didn't just take the office of a high priest. We've talked before in another lesson where they couldn't take the office of a high priest, and Jesus certainly didn't take his office here. We are reminded yet again that Jesus has brought a better covenant. The former had priest after priest. One died and was replaced with another. Jesus is priest forever. It's an unchangeable priesthood. One thing I've heard people complain sometimes is about how our president changes every 4 years. Sometimes he gets to stay in office a little longer. But a good one comes in and he just begins to make some good changes, and then we have to change the president again. Or sometimes they get in and they're a bad president, and maybe it's a good thing that we change every 4 years. But the same was likely true of the Old Testament priests. Even though they were high priests for life, the constant changing from one to another wasn't a good thing. Do you recall Eli, how he was not a good priest, and God was through Samuel was chastising him? So this happened where there were bad priests sometimes. Well, verse 25 has some pretty amazing statements in it. Jesus is able to save to the uttermost, or this is completely, those who come to God through him. He always lives to make intercession for them. He goes to God on our behalf. He's our lawyer telling God, hey, she's right with you. Okay, or he's right with you. And it's because he's made us so. Okay. Then the writer lists the benefits of having Jesus as high priest. Again, remember, he's listed these benefits before. Number 1, he is holy, harmless, and undefiled. Remember that again is in contrast to the priests of the old who were defiled. They were human. Number 2, he's separate from sinners. But recall, it's talked before about how because he lived here on earth, he understands our weaknesses because he lived through it himself. But he remained sinless. Number 3, he has become higher than the heavens. Number 4, he does not need to offer up daily sacrifices, either for himself or for the people, because he did it once. Number 5, he offered himself for once for all. Okay. Number 6, he has been perfected forever. What an amazing high priest we have, and we will always have him. If we take nothing away from this chapter, I'd like us to come away with this one point. I feel like this is his major point almost for the whole book. is that if Jesus is our high priest and the old law is still in effect, then he sinned because he was not qualified to be priest under the old law. But that law must be done away with. There must be a new law in place. Hebrews is pretty clear on that point, and we'll discuss more in chapter 8 about God's new covenant. Okay. Better is found 3 times in this chapter, verses 7, 19, and 22. Let's review our key words and phrases. And of course, remember the entire theme for the book is we've got something better. Chapter 1, no one better than the Son, a better person. Chapter 2, don't forget what you knew. And remember, the goal was to try to have that last word rhyme with the chapter number to help you remember. Chapter 2, don't forget what you knew. Okay, so that one sounds a little funny because it should be don't forget what you know. But it's changed so that new rhymes with 2. Okay. Better knowledge is in chapter 2. Chapter 3, faithfulness is the key, better than Moses. Chapter 4, the rest that he swore, better rest. Chapter 5, our priest is forever alive, better priesthood. Chapter 6, it might be impossible to fix, better hope. Chapter 7, priest of God in heaven. And again, I've changed that one for our purposes here. And you have the discussion questions. These will be posted in the email and as well as being on the post in the Facebook group. Now, I do want to mention, if you'd like to be notified when I post a new lesson, you can just click subscribe. It should look like a little bell. You can click subscribe and you can get notifications and it'll tell you when I upload a new video. So thank you for joining me. Bye.